This cold case has some mind-blowing twists and turns. It's about 2 decades old, and new information is still developing. And the victim, though presumed dead, might actually still be alive. No body has ever been found. Maura Murray was a 21-year-old college student that got in an accident on a snowy February night in New Hampshire. Though she appeared unhurt, when police arrived about 20 minutes later, she was gone. No sign of her has ever been found. This case could be a suicide, or an accidental death outside in the elements, or an abduction and murder. I'm actually going to propose something that's none of those things, a different possibility. No, not aliens, but something that there actually is somewhat of a precedent for in other cases. Meanwhile, her family still searches hard. They won't give up, understandably. Maura was a bright girl with a very promising future, but also a somewhat troubled young woman. She seemed to be suffering through some kind of crisis right before her disappearance. Was her disappearance caused by the crisis? Let's lay it all out. We do mostly true crime at this channel, but we're interested in giving you any story that challenges your mind or ignites your imagination. Starting this week, we're going to give you something a little different on Fridays. We're going to delve a bit into fiction, creepypastas, short horror, maybe urban legends, dark stories we hope will entertain you. We'll call it Creepy Friday. If you support our efforts, click subscribe. If you're feeling generous, click like. And if you want drinks to be on us, next to the subscribe button, you'll see a little bell. Click this, and you'll be notified when we publish something. To express our gratitude, we'll send you a pizza at 2 a.m. every Wednesday night. Maybe. The case of Maura Murray shows how our lives can be so fragile, even when everything seems like it's going our way. I feel a lot of anxiety in posting public remarks on these cases because there are family members still alive. You have to be so careful not to say something that's unfair or might be hurtful. Sometimes you find yourself seeing a disturbing possibility, but you don't want to speculate publicly. Because Maura seemed to be in the middle of some kind of deep personal crisis when she went missing, it becomes tempting to speculate. But I'm going to try to avoid speculating on things where there is no evidence at all. Maura's family has very much encouraged the true crime channels to keep discussing her case because it keeps the pressure on authorities. Before getting into the timeline of events, I want to give you a taste of why this case is so frustrating and at the same time so intriguing. You run into some weird things. For example, Maura's boyfriend, who was many miles away when she went missing and took a military leave in order to fly to New Hampshire to help with the search, received a strange voicemail while he was en route. This came about 34 hours after she disappeared. The call was possibly made with a calling card, so it couldn't be traced. Maura was known to use calling cards. At the time, it was a cheaper way to make long-distance calls. Well, in this call could be heard the sound of whimpering or quiet sobbing. Was Maura still alive 34 hours after her accident? Did she reach someone's landline or a payphone? We'll get into it later. There's no definitive answer, but there is more evidence on this. Another intriguing piece is a witness who came forward 3 months after the disappearance to say he'd seen a young woman on foot moving quickly on the road 4 or 5 miles from the accident location where she was last seen. This man lived less than a mile from the accident scene. His description of what she was wearing matched the description the police had put out. It's a tantalizing example of how there are different ways we can consider this kind of information. Why did he wait 3 months to come forward? If he really did see her, it becomes a vital piece of information on how far she may have gotten, and also into her mindset, since she probably wouldn't have stayed on the road that long if her plan was to die in the woods. But you have to weigh all the possibilities. As we always see in these cases, many unreliable or mistaken witnesses emerge. There's something about famous cases that draws the attention of people who just want to be a part of something big. But there are darker possibilities. I'm not naming the contractor for now, so I'm just speaking generally about the situation. Let's say she has made it as far as this witness's house and knocked on the door for help. And it turned out tragically that this was the wrong door to knock on. So she becomes a victim of foul play. Then, as the investigation grows, the perpetrator of that foul play becomes more nervous. Searches are underway near his own yard. So he has an incentive to want to move the investigation further away from the scene of the accident. If he can convince authorities he saw Maura 4 or 5 miles down the road, that might pull the searches away from his property. Now, I'm not saying that happened. I'm saying that's how you have to think. You have to consider every angle. We'll go more into that later. A third strange bit of evidence we'll go over is a real head scratcher. Only one person saw Maura after the accident, a school bus driver on his way home who talked briefly with her. He left, and minutes later, a police car arrived. However, she was gone. But here's the weird part. Police eventually found a rag stuffed into her exhaust pipe. Maybe you think she stopped for a snack and some predator stuffed it in her tailpipe and followed in his car, then snatched her when the car broke down. But here's the thing. The rag was from Maura's emergency roadside kit. So you might then suggest it was an attempt at suicide. But after the accident, the car was not running. The collision had rendered it inoperable. So those are just 3 little strange aspects to this case which show how difficult it can be to sift through evidence. We'll go into more detail on these things down the road. So let's start the journey. Maura Murray was a 21-year-old nursing student attending UMass Amherst. She lived on campus. Her boyfriend was in the military and stationed in Oklahoma, hundreds of miles away. On a snowy day in February of 2004, she took what seems to have been a spontaneous trip north. Her destination remains unknown, but probably was the White Mountains in New Hampshire, a place her family frequently vacationed at. Or possibly she was heading for Burlington, Vermont. A little after 7 p.m., on a rural roadway, she crashed into a tree. The crash was loud enough that a neighbor heard it, looked out her window, and called the police. The village she crashed in is called Woodsville. She crashed near what locals call the Weathered Barn. There's a dangerous turn there. Woodsville is part of a town called Haverhill, population 4,500, and it's on the border of Vermont. A rail line runs through, along with U.S. Route 302 and State Routes 10 and 135. I'm not sure I've been to this specific town, but I've been to the area, and it's beautiful, especially in the winter. Probably because of the major routes passing through, it does have stores, restaurants, supermarkets, and even a McDonald's. Maura was born and raised in Hanson, Massachusetts. She has an older brother, 2 older sisters, and 1 younger sister. She'd been a star athlete in high school and had very high SAT scores, graduating near the top of her class. She followed her older sister, Julie, into prestigious West Point. Julie, a year ahead of her, loved everything about West Point and is the one who talked Maura into going there. But Maura didn't love West Point. In fact, Julie found her bawling one night in her room. Discipline and structure is everything at West Point, and not everyone is into that. But it was in the summer after her freshman year that something really unexpected took place, something which likely indicated much deeper problems. Maura was caught shoplifting. She stole makeup from the store on the base. A couple of years later, a few months before she disappeared, Maura would be charged with credit card fraud. This suggests a pattern. One thing we have to keep in mind is things aren't always what they seem to be. For example, we might make the mistake of rushing to judgment and concluding these thefts were a sign of a character flaw. But Maura didn't really need money, and petty theft doesn't at all fit into the rest of Maura's hard-driven and flawless background. So what else might be going on? Maura's sister, Julie, believed these things were possibly a cry for help. Maybe. But there's another angle to look at, too. About 6 in 1,000 people are affected by the disorder called kleptomania. It's an impulse control disorder. About half of those afflicted with it also have other mood disorders. It involves an irresistible and overpowering urge to steal. It's actually a medical condition. It seems to result from differences in the brain structure of its victims. It's interesting to me because I've been investigating how minor differences in brain structure can be a major factor in psychopathy. In the case of kleptomania, it's thought that the area of the brain that deals with inhibitions and impulse control might have weaker connections. This is the area of the brain called the amygdala. So maybe we can picture it this way. Everyone has experienced an inappropriate thought. It might be as simple as something funny strikes you at a funeral, but you know it's the wrong situation to laugh at. So you inhibit the impulse to laugh. Now imagine if you have the thought of stealing something at Best Buy. Maybe the thought provokes the slightest feeling of excitement, but your impulse control squashes it right away. It all happens so fast you aren't even really aware of it. But if the part of your brain that squashes these thoughts and impulses isn't working well, that thought might result in some dopamine being released, which we feel when we sense danger. So your brain sparks to life. The brain of the kleptomaniac lacks serotonin, a neurotransmitter. So this flood of dopamine feels particularly good. It's a jolt of energy. Kleptomania episodes tend to be spontaneous. There's no planning. They happen more frequently when the victim is under anxiety. I am not saying Maura Murray suffered this disease. I have no qualifications to say that, and even a qualified person would have to meet with the victim in order to diagnose. I'm saying that if she suffered this, can you imagine the awful feelings it would lead to with her? Here's a super successful person, a high achiever, a good kid. It would be shattering to wake up the next day and realize you shoplifted. It'd be crushing, completely at odds with your self-image. It would add immensely to whatever other stress and anxiety you were experiencing. To repeat, I don't know that Maura had this, just trying to make pieces fit that don't seem to fit. So ultimately, Maura dropped out of West Point after 1 year and transferred to UMass. She enlisted in the nursing program. Her mother was a nurse, and there's every reason to think this gifted student, someone described as caring and empathetic, would be an excellent nurse. But in the days before Maura disappeared, something was very wrong. Now, this may have absolutely nothing to do with her disappearance, other than the fact that it led to her being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But a lot was going on. As I said, 3 months before her disappearance, she got caught using stolen credit card information. Where did she get that information? We don't know. I mean, if I decided right now to commit credit card fraud, I wouldn't know where to begin. UMass is a big college with a lot of kids living there. Maybe some of these kids sell this kind of thing. Stolen cards. I don't know. It does make me wonder about shady connections. Now, Maura worked for campus security, which is worth noting and keeping in mind. Campus police are actual police. They usually work closely with the town police. A few days before she went missing, Maura's father, Fred, paid her a visit. The reason is said to be to help her buy a new car. They went to dinner. Afterwards, she dropped her father off at his hotel. Then they went to a party. On the way back to his hotel, she crashed the car. Substantial damage was done. She was apparently unhurt, but was very shaken up. No charges of DUI were brought. No breathalyzer was administered at the scene. Again, I want to be cautious, but I do feel I should explain how it generally works, at least in Massachusetts and probably everywhere. If you've been drinking and you get in an accident where no one was hurt, it helps if you know any local cops. And if you work for campus security, you know local cops. This is just a reality of the world. A DUI could ruin this kid's career. A cop might be reluctant to do that, and certainly would be reluctant if she had some names she could drop. Please don't overreact to that. Cops are human beings. This is a hard situation. It is what it is. And this might be important background information here. It's also very possible that Maura had regulated her drinking and was well underneath the legal limit. But as we'll see from what happened the night she disappeared, there are reasons to doubt she was hesitant to drink and drive. So this first accident was early Saturday morning. But let's rewind things a couple of days more for the first signs of trouble. Maura went missing on the 9th, a Monday. The dinner with her dad and subsequent accident was on the 7th, a Saturday. Well, on the 5th, 2 days before that, begins the first strange incident. She was on duty at her campus security job. Around 1 a.m., her supervisor arrived to find her in some kind of state of shock. Maura is described as, quote, completely zoned out, no reaction at all, unresponsive. The supervisor not only dismissed her from the rest of her shift, but personally escorted her back to her room. The supervisor did ask her what was wrong. She could only utter 2 words, my sister. More than a decade later, a possible explanation was given by her older sister, Kathleen. Around 10:30, Kathleen called during Maura's shift. The call apparently brought Maura to tears. According to Kathleen, a recovering alcoholic, she'd been discharged from rehab that evening. Her fiancé picked her up, and on the way home, he took her to a liquor store. This apparently was extremely upsetting to Maura, and supposedly that explains Maura's very strange behavior. Now I get the feeling something is really missing from this account. It's certainly understandable that Maura would be extremely upset on hearing this. Anger would be an expected reaction, or deep sadness. But Maura seems to have had a kind of breakdown. I can't help thinking that either more happened that night than we know, or more was going on in Maura's life to that point, where this was the straw that broke the camel's back. Not saying she had a complete breakdown, but for the supervisor to walk her home and note that she was unresponsive suggests something more than anger or deep sadness was going on. 2 days later, her father visited. Was that related to this breakdown? Maybe not, but he did stay in a motel instead of driving home to Connecticut. So Maura and her friend went to dinner with Maura's dad. They had a few drinks. Afterwards, she dropped him off, and then they went out to a party with his car. Around 2:30 in the morning, she left the party. At 3:30 a.m., on the way back to his motel, she struck a guardrail and did about 10 grand of damage to his car. Someone drove Maura to her dad's motel room, where she stayed the rest of the night. At 4:49, she placed a call to her boyfriend in Oklahoma. Safe to say, Maura was having a really hard time. Sunday morning, her dad dropped her off at school, then returned to Connecticut. They spoke that night at 11:30 by phone, and he reminded her to obtain an accident form at the RMV Monday. I believe this was the last time they ever spoke. Here, I remind myself that we all live flawed, fragile lives, and we all do things, especially when we're that age, that we hope are never remembered. And unless something happens tragic like this, they aren't. Maura was still up past midnight after talking with her dad Sunday night. Was it during this phone call that she decided to take an unplanned trip north? After she got off the phone, she searched on a computer for directions to the Berkshires, which are in western Massachusetts, and also directions to Burlington, Vermont, which is in the north. So the phone call seems to have been the final turning point. Whether she just needed to get away to clear her mind, or whether she was thinking suicide, it was at this point that she started searching for escape destinations. Printed directions to Burlington were found in the car. Burlington is Vermont's largest city, a nice college town that holds the University of Vermont, a big school, and St. Michael's. She also made a call to Stowe, Vermont, a ski resort town, but she didn't make a reservation. And she called to inquire about staying at a condo in Bartlett, New Hampshire, a place in the White Mountains that the Murray family used to spend a lot of time vacation at when she was growing up. Her father assured this is where she was heading. An area that he says she knew very well. There's no indication Maura was meeting anyone, but it's possible. Most of the evidence indicates she just needed to get away, but she needed it badly, was in some kind of distress. She emailed a work supervisor at a nursing facility to say she needed time off to attend to a death in the family, though there had been no death. So this was a very sudden, unplanned trip. She left a message with a boyfriend in Oklahoma that they would talk later, and she got in her car and left. In her car, Murray packed clothing, toiletries, college textbooks, and birth control pills. When police later searched her room, they found her belongings packed in boxes and the artwork removed from the walls. They also found on top of the packed boxes a printed email from her boyfriend, which indicated trouble in their relationship. Details on that Email are not public. I don't think. We just know there was trouble. Reports are that this might have been an older email dealing with infidelity, but she did seem to want this email found, though we can't know that for sure. So there are a lot of mixed signals here. Packing her textbooks indicates she planned to study. Packing her belongings indicates she planned on moving out. Messaging her supervisor with a made-up excuse suggests she planned on coming back. But leaving the printed email on the top of the packed boxes where it would readily be found possibly indicates something darker. At 3:40 p.m., she withdrew $280 from an ATM. Here are what are probably the last photos of Maura. Closed circuit footage shows her buying liquor at a nearby liquor store. She was alone. She bought Bailey's Irish Cream, Kahlua, and vodka. As a former bartender, I can tell you these are the ingredients for a drink called a mudslide. She also bought a box of wine. From the road, she called her voicemail at 4:37. Note that this is the last recorded use of her cell phone. There's no evidence she had chosen a specific destination. Considering what was going on with her father in the car, it's notable that she didn't call him to tell him where she was going or even that she was going anywhere. The weather was snowy. Classes had been canceled that day. A little after 7 p.m., a Woodsville resident heard a loud thump outside. Through her window, she could see a car up against the snowbank along Route 112. The car pointed west on the eastbound side, suggesting, I guess, a spinout. At 7:27, the woman called police to report the accident. She claimed she saw someone smoking a cigarette inside the car, but she later thought this could have been a cell phone. Maura didn't smoke, as far as I know. Around this time, a school bus driver who lived nearby came upon the scene. He stopped to see if help was needed. He observed a young woman walking around the car. She appeared unhurt, but cold and shivering. He offered to call for help, but she pleaded with him not to, saying she had already called AAA. AAA did not log any such call. The bus driver, knowing cellular reception in the area was spotty at best, called the police when he got home, moments later. His call came at 7:43. From his home, he did notice several cars pass on the road before police arrived. Another local resident claims she passed the scene around 7:37. According to her, police were there at that time. She claimed a police SUV was parked face to face with Maura's car. This witness pulled over briefly, but oddly didn't see anyone inside or outside either car. So she went home. We have to pause to point out some problems with this testimony. Police logs indicate the Haverhill cop, Cecil Smith, arrived at 7:46, which seems consistent with the school bus driver having called at 7:43 before police had arrived. The best explanation seems to be that the woman in the car simply had the time wrong. But in an unsolved mystery, any discrepancy should be noted. It also strikes me as unusual that she didn't see anyone, not even the cop. But on a dark, snowy night, maybe he was just on the other side of the car and she didn't notice. Presumably, he had a flashlight on, but I guess she didn't see it. The police report has the cop arriving at 7:46 and finding no one there. The car had struck a tree on the driver's side, and the damage made the car inoperable. Both airbags had deployed. I want to repeat this because it's noteworthy. Both airbags had deployed. The car was locked. Red stains were discovered inside and outside the car. Remember, several inches of fresh snow had fallen earlier. The red stains appeared to the cop to be wine. The box of wine in the back seat had sustained damage, and some of the bottles were missing. Inside the car, they found an empty beer bottle. They also found a AAA card, so perhaps she did attempt to call AAA. They found gloves, diamond jewelry, Maura's favorite stuffed animal, and a book about mountain climbing in the White Mountains. The presence of the stuffed animal could be meaningful. Missing were her debit and credit cards and her cell phone. None of these have ever been found, nor has the black backpack she was said to have. I'm assuming that part of the description comes from the bus driver because it's not in the ATM photos. Or maybe the black backpack was just missing from her belongings at UMass, so searchers later presumed she had it. The location of the accident at the weathered barn has been described as a hairpin turn. Let's refresh the timeline of the accident. At 7:27, the neighbor watching from a window called police. At 7:43, the bus driver called police from home. So he spoke with Morris sometime between 7:27 and 7:43. He lived in view of the accident scene, so it would have taken him at least a couple minutes to get home and go inside his house. So maybe he came upon the scene sometime between 7:35 and 7:40. The cop arrived at 7:46. We're dismissing for now the other witness, a woman driving by who says she briefly stopped at the scene at 7:37. So somewhere within that window of 7:27 to about 7:46, Maura disappeared, and probably closer to even a little after 7:40. She may have seen police arrive and hid, perhaps because of her drinking. Something similar to that is what police had assumed that night, because they see that kind of thing in alcohol-related crashes. The bus driver said there was no cell service in that location. In any case, reports are the last time Maura used her cell phone was hours earlier to check her voicemail. The woods are thick at the spot, and no tracks were found in the fresh snow going into them. However, the search at 8 p.m. would have been very limited, so she could have walked a ways and gone into the woods in a place that tracks weren't discovered. Other than the brief search that night, no one searched until Wednesday morning. No further snow fell in that period. Police searched 20 miles along Route 112 Wednesday and found no footprints anywhere in the snow. Maura was young, in shape, a former track star. She could have walked several miles before turning off the road, and her tracks could have been missed. She had been driving east on Route 112. She had just driven through the commercial area, so it would have been a relatively short walk back to civilization. That night, police only searched in that direction because it made more sense she would go that way. However, if she walked east, it was fairly desolate. There were residences spread out. There were also empty summer camps and cabins. Days later, these were searched to see if anyone had broken inside in order to seek shelter. Nothing was found. Like I said, police searched very thoroughly on Wednesday. That night, 2 cops visited the accident scene before a car was towed an hour or so after the accident. First was the town cop, Smith, who handled things. A state trooper stopped by, spoke for a minute with the town cop without exiting his car, then drove around a little bit looking for the missing young woman. The bus driver, Butch, also helped the town cop search the area. Other than their driving a little around that night, no official search took place until Wednesday morning, a day and a half later. This was when Maura's dad arrived. The search was led by New Hampshire Fish and Game. A police dog, using a scent from one of Maura's gloves, tracked her scent 100 feet east from where the accident occurred. Then it lost the scent. This suggested to police she may have gotten into a car. They also searched with a helicopter that could see heat signatures. New Hampshire is quite accustomed to searching for people that get lost in the woods or in the mountains in the cold. They found nothing. At 5 p.m. on Wednesday, Maura's boyfriend arrived and was interrogated. By 7 p.m., police believed Maura's purpose was to either run away or attempt suicide. A rigorous grid search was conducted a few months later in the early summer, but this also turned up nothing. The focus was to find Maura's backpack. So these are the basic details. The way Maura left her dorm room suggests she wasn't coming back. That's what New Hampshire police concluded. Some believe she committed suicide by wandering off into the woods with a couple of bottles of wine. There are reports she may have had sleeping pills. I don't know. But police found no tracks going off the road into the woods. It doesn't seem like she could get far in the thick woods full of deep snow. It certainly seems likely that if she did this, her backpack would be found. What about the runaway theory? In the years after, Maura's mom died, and I believe of cancer, as did her older sister, Kathleen. Her family just doesn't believe Maura could be aware of these things and not come home or contact them. I agree. Maura's dad is convinced she was abducted and killed. He believes it was an opportunistic local predator, and there might actually be some evidence for that. There's also another young woman who disappeared just 6 weeks later in the area and has never been found. We'll get to that a little later in the series. And at the end, we'll propose something a little different as a possibility. Hopefully you can stick around. If you have your own theory, please post it below. If you want to support our efforts, please click subscribe. If you want me to send you never-ending karma from the great beyond, once I get there, of course, please click like and hit the notification bell so you'll know when we post something. Your support means everything. Please join us next episode as we discuss the mysterious sobbing phone call.